Here is a question that should be keeping energy ministers awake at night. How is it possible that the most aggressive period of renewable energy investment in human history is unfolding simultaneously with record-breaking fossil fuel production? In 2023, global investment in clean energy surpassed $3 trillion for the first time. Wind farms are rising off the coasts of Europe. Solar panels are blanketing deserts from the Sahara to the Mojave. Governments from Brussels to Beijing are pledging net zero futures with solemn televised sincerity. And yet, global oil demand hit an all-time high that same year. Coal consumption reached a record peak. Natural gas infrastructure is being locked in for decades. The very nations funding the green transition are, with the other hand, signing long-term fossil fuel contracts, subsidizing domestic oil exploration, and building new pipelines they promised they never would. This is not hypocrisy in the conventional sense. Politicians are not simply lying, though some are. This is something more structural, more deeply embedded in the architecture of human decision-making, something that conventional economic models built on the assumption of rational actors optimizing long-term outcomes are fundamentally unable to explain. The numbers don't add up under classical economics, but under a different kind of economics, one that accounts for how humans actually think, not how textbooks say they should, the paradox resolves with disturbing clarity. What we are witnessing is not a failure of policy design. It is a predictable, almost mathematically inevitable consequence of the way governments, voters, and energy markets process time, risk, and loss. And once you see the mechanism, you cannot unsee it. That mechanism was mapped in large part by Richard H. Thaler, the University of Chicago economist who won the Nobel Prize in economics in 2017 for his foundational contributions to behavioral economics. Thaler spent decades demonstrating that real human decision makers are not rational optimizers. They are predictably irrational in specific recurring ways. His frameworks, mental accounting, present bias, loss, aversion, the endowment effect, were built to explain individual behavior. But as this episode will demonstrate, they scale with uncomfortable precision to explain why governments keep making the same catastrophic energy mistake. Let us begin with the framework Thaler is perhaps most closely associated with: mental accounting. In his landmark research, most fully developed in his 1999 paper Mental Accounting Matters, Thaler demonstrated that humans do not treat money as a single fungible resource. Instead, we categorize it into separate psychological accounts, and we apply different rules, different emotional weights, and different decision-making logic to each account, even when the underlying economics are identical. Governments do exactly the same thing with energy spending. The budget allocated to renewable subsidies exists in one mental account. The future investment account associated with long-term vision, international prestige, climate commitments, and moral signaling. The budget flowing to oil and gas through royalty structures, tax relief, strategic reserves, or direct subsidy exists in a completely separate account, the energy security account associated with immediate stability, voter comfort, and economic continuity. Because these accounts are psychologically segregated, the contradiction between them is never truly felt. A government can announce a $50 billion green investment package on Monday and approve a new offshore drilling license on Thursday, and the cognitive dissonance is neutralized simply because the two decisions live in different mental rooms. Thaler's framework predicts this with precision. Rational unified accounting would force a trade-off. Mental accounting allows a government to feel simultaneously virtuous and secure while actually being neither. Now layer in present bias, Thaler's articulation of the well-documented human tendency to dramatically overweight immediate costs and rewards relative to future ones. This is not mere short-sightedness. Thaler's research, building on work with collaborators like Shlomo Benartzi, on retirement savings behavior shows that humans apply a steep psychological discount rate to future outcomes, so steep that it cannot be explained by any rational model of time preference. For energy policy, this is catastrophic. The benefits of a renewable transition are diffuse, slow, and arrive decades in the future. The costs of transitioning away from fossil fuels, higher immediate energy prices, industrial disruption, regional unemployment in fossil-dependent communities arrive now. A politician operating under present bias, responding to voters who share that same bias, will consistently underinvest in the transition's pain management and overinvest in short-term fossil fuel stability. The data confirms this at scale. International Energy Agency has found that while clean energy investment is growing, a substantial portion of government energy subsidies worldwide still flows to fossil fuels, running into hundreds of billions of dollars annually, not because policymakers have calculated this to be optimal, but because the mental accounting keeps the two streams separate and the present bias makes fossil fuel security feel more real and more urgent than climate security every single budget cycle. Then there is loss aversion, perhaps Thaler's most powerful contribution, developed alongside Daniel Kahneman. The core finding is that humans feel the pain of a loss approximately twice as intensely as they feel the pleasure of an equivalent gain. In energy terms, the fear of losing stable, affordable energy supply today is psychologically approximately twice as powerful as the appeal of gaining a clean energy future tomorrow. Every policy that risks near-term price spikes, supply disruptions, or industrial closures will trigger this asymmetric psychological response in voters and the politicians who depend on them. The result is a systematic bias toward energy conservatism, toward protecting the existing fossil fuel infrastructure even when the rational long-term calculation clearly favors transition. What mainstream energy analysis consistently misses is that these behavioral forces do not cancel out over time, they compound. The conventional policy view holds that the green transition is fundamentally a financing and technology problem, that if we can drive down the cost of solar panels and batteries far enough, the economics will flip and rational actors will choose renewables automatically. This is the logic behind carbon pricing, technology subsidies, and most international climate frameworks. Thaler's behavioral economics suggests this view is dangerously incomplete. The transition is not primarily a technology problem. It is a sludge problem. Thaler introduced the concept of sludge, the inverse of a nudge, to describe friction, bureaucratic complexity, and process barriers that prevent people from taking actions that are in their own best interest. In the energy context, sludge is everywhere on the green side of the ledger. Permitting processes for renewable projects can tow key years, grid interconnection queues stretch for over a decade in some jurisdictions. Building codes, utility regulations, and financing structures are all calibrated to legacy fossil fuel infrastructure, creating invisible but enormous friction for the clean alternative. Meanwhile, fossil fuel infrastructure benefits from decades of embedded regulatory pathways, trained workforces, established supply chains, and what Thaler's research describes as the endowment effect, the tendency to overvalue what we already possess simply because we possess it. Existing fossil fuel capacity is not evaluated neutrally against new renewable capacity. It is protected, extended, and subsidized precisely because it is already ours. Utilities, governments, and industries have an ownership relationship with fossil infrastructure that generates psychological resistance to decommissioning it. Independent of any rational cost-benefit calculation, the unseen consequence of all of this is what behavioral economists call a lock-in, a dynamic where present bias, loss aversion, sludge combine to trap decision makers in a suboptimal equilibrium, even as they sincerely believe they are transitioning out of it. Governments can spend decades transitioning, while the structural incentives of the behavioral architecture ensure that the transition never reaches critical mass. The policy record of the last 20 years is in this light, not a story of insufficient ambition. It is a story of ambition being systematically neutralized by behavioral forces that the policy framework never accounted for. Thaler's models hold. The trajectory from here follows a predictable arc, and it is not the one those climate communicators are describing. Watch for what might be called green theater intensification. As the gap between climate commitments and fossil fuel reality widens, governments will respond not by closing the gap, but by amplifying the symbolic gestures that live in the green mental account. More announcements, more targets, more international pledges, while quietly deepening fossil fuel dependency in the separate security account. The behavioral pressure to maintain both accounts simultaneously will increase, not decrease, as the climate crisis becomes more visible. Watch also for loss aversion backlash cycles as energy transition policies begin to impose real near-term costs, higher electricity prices, industrial restructuring, fossil fuel job losses. Thaler's framework predicts organized political resistance that will be psychologically disproportionate to the actual magnitude of the losses. This is already visible in electoral shifts across Europe and North America. Rational cost-benefit analysis would suggest the long-term gains dwarf the near-term costs. Loss aversion ensures voters will not experience it that way. The one intervention that Thaler's nudge architecture would prescribe is the structural redesign of default choices, ensuring that the path of least resistance in energy investment, permitting, and consumer choice automatically favors clean alternatives. Without that redesign, the behavioral trap remains fully operational. Here is the reframe to carry with you. The green energy trap is not a story about bad intentions or insufficient technology. It is a story about a policy architecture designed for rational actors that is being navigated by human beings. And human beings, as Thaler spent a lifetime proving, are reliably structure raw. Lily, predictably, something else entirely. The question worth sitting with is this. If governments know about these behavioral forces, if behavioral economics is now taught in every major policy school in the world, why are the incentive structures still designed as if we are rational? Is it ignorance, or is the irrationality itself politically useful? Leave your answer in the comments. If this episode shifted something in how you see the energy debate, like and subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next episode goes even deeper into the behavioral economics of markets that aren't behaving the way anyone expected.